Alright guys, so here we are. This is going to be my longer version of my color grading video. And right now we're just scrubbing through the 4 clips that we used in the shorter color grading video. Alright, we're going to pay close attention to the scopes up here. This is the parade scope and the vector scope. Vector scope comes into play when we're talking about skin tones, but we're going to mostly be paying attention to the parade. Alright. Now here I am going to be adjusting my blacks to try to get them to touch the 0 on the parade, and my whites until they're touching the 100 on the parade. And that's how you know that you have it, for the most part, perfectly color corrected. The rest of it is just me sort of messing around with exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows just to create a look that I like, that looks good to my eye. Alright, now we're coming up here to where we're going to be on the skin tones, and we're going to go into HSL secondary for this. In this video, I actually messed up a bit, so you want to select the skin tones, and everything that I'm doing right now is correct. But when I swap to the 3 color circles, where I put blue into the highlights, that's correct. But where I'm putting red into the midtones, I was actually supposed to put it into the shadows for it to work a little better. But I still managed to come out with some very accurate skin tones. So I guess that just shows that you can use it however you want. But I would recommend instead putting red into the shadows over midtones, for this one at least. Alright, and we're just fiddling with it a little bit. We're going to bring the saturation down just so our skin isn't looking like, devilish or super red like it is right now. And bringing the saturation down, make sure that there's not as much red or blue into it. And usually when you're bringing saturation down, you want to bring your contrast up to kind of counterbalance how that goes. But alright, now I'm just trying to make sure that more of the skin tones are selected, and you want to pay attention to the vector scope, which is the circular scope in the top left corner. And you want to try to keep your colors on that top left line. That's actually called the blood line, and I know that sounds like such a dark name, but it's where all skin tones rest because we all bleed red. And that's, in my opinion, like just another reason and proof as to why racism is so stupid. So when it comes to that line, you can color correct any skin tone on that line and just take everything that I'm doing here and apply it to that. Alright, and now we're heading into the curves, and I just like to put an S-curve on all of my footage, even if it's just a slight S-curve. And what that does is it brings the shadows down and the highlights up, and it adds such a nice look to the footage. For my preferences, I like to have really desaturated greens. That's why we're going into the hue versus sat curve, and we're desaturating my greens. Not only do I really like to desaturate greens, I like to give them a mintier look. So we're gonna go back into the greens with the hue versus hue curves, and we're gonna make sure that these greens get a bit more of a cooler look. And you can see what that does to the moss that I selected. It just makes it a little bit more mintier green. Now here I'm actually going to bump up the saturation of the sky just to sort of make it pop out a bit. It was a beautiful blue sky day, and just really want that blue to shine through the trees. Alright, and we're going to bring that down a little bit, not liking how that looks, so we bring it up a bit, and then we just wind up leaving it right where it was. Still works out to me. Alright, and that's before and after of what the curves did. Alright, And I think we're about done with that clip. I think we're gonna mess with, the exposure just a little bit and bring it down until we see how it looks in the shadows, and we're gonna bring the contrast up a bit. I like to come back and forth and just fiddle around with these things just to get my desired look. All right, and here's a before and after. All right, I think I'm gonna fiddle with it one more time when I scroll forward. Yeah, see, shadows are a little dark there for me, so I go back in and I just bring the exposure up a touch, and then I mess with the S curve just a bit to make sure that the shadows aren't as black there to where you're not going to be able to see any of the work that we did. And I'm actually reversing the S curve. All right, there we go. Yep, still like how it looks for the most part. All right, now we're getting into the first indoor clip. All right, for this, we pretty much follow a lot of the same basic guidelines that we did for that. So we're still gonna pay attention to the parade scope. We're still gonna pay attention to the vector scope when it comes to skin tones, but we're gonna bring the whites up until even just a pixel is touching in that 100. And then we're gonna bring the blacks down until even just a pixel is touching in the black. I'm going to do an extra step here, and I'm going to white balance off of this white paintbrush, and you see that it really cools the image down, which is perfect to me. Then I'm still going to bring the exposure down because I like my clips a little darker. We're going to bring the contrast up, and we're going to bring the highlights up a touch and shadows down just a touch. And that is where we were and where we are now. All right, now we're going to head back into the HSL secondary, and actually for this clip my skin tones were pretty spot on, so I didn't need to do any color correction for the skin tones here, so that was pretty lucky. All right, and now we're just kind of waiting around. I don't know what I was doing here. Probably got interrupted by someone and was waiting to get back to it, but all right. So now we're checking into it and we see that it's just about right. We're not really gonna make any changes. We are gonna denoise it a bit and blur it a touch. But when it comes to this, we're not going to really make any changes to it. It's pretty spot on. So I'm just going to call it a day from there, and we're going to finish up with HSL secondary, and we're going to head into the curves. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're just going to add a slight little S curve to it. Liking how that's looking. We're going to take some of the greens out of that back of the gray wall and just try to bring it more to an accurate gray. We're going to go into my Luma versus Sat, and we're going to crush my blacks, and we're going to crush the whites. Now the reason why we do that is it takes out any residual color that is in the blacks and whites to ensure that we're getting a true gray, a true green, a true black, and a true white. And there's no residual leftover color artifacts in any of our tones. All right, and yeah, looks like that's where we're gonna call it for that. Gonna scrub forward, scrub back, and scrub forward. And we're just going to show a quick before and after of everything that we did. So that's the initial, that's the curves, that's that. And we're just going to add a vignette because I always feel that a vignette adds a little bit more of that moody feel, but it also brings the attention towards the subject. So I like to use a vignette every once in a while, usually on interview clips or talking head clips. I just feel it adds that bit more of character that I like for my footage. All right, and now we're getting into the fun clips. All right, so this is my custom S-Log profile. And you can use either S-Log2 or S-Log3. I think I used S-Log2 for this first clip and maybe S-Log3 for the interior clip. But the settings stay the same. Once again, we're just gonna bring the whites and the blacks to that 0 and 100. And I'm gonna white balance off of this white house that's in the background. And I don't like how warm it got, so I'm just gonna bring it down a touch to keep it a little cool. Once again, mess with the exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows. And we're looking pretty good. All right, now we're gonna get back into HSL secondary, go for the skin tones once again. At this point, I'm probably just repeating myself, but you're gonna see how it works in multiple settings on bright sunny days covered by a lot of shade of trees, super cloudy days where it was actually raining, and then 2 indoor shots using a flat profile and a pretty basic profile. Now, even though it's cloudy out, it is still daytime, so you still want to put blue into the highlights. Once again, I make the mistake of putting red into the midtones, but it winds up working out. So I'm thinking you can interchange midtones and shadows. I definitely recommend putting the red into the shadows instead, though. And once again, we're going to balance it out, and we're going to try to get it to that line on the vector scope. All right, we're going to bring the saturation down quite a bit, and then bring it back up. And then we're going to bring the contrast, bring the saturation down, and bring the contrast up. All right, and we're gonna just take a look at what that's doing. We're gonna denoise it, and we're gonna blur it a bit too. All right, that just makes it a softer change. It's not gonna be super harsh, but you can see that the skin tone comes out super perfect. Like, when I learned this trick, it saved me so much time with color grading. All right, and once again, the obligatory for my footage, at least, slight S-curve. You don't really have to mess around with the S-curves if you don't feel comfortable with it, but I would definitely suggest getting a handle on it. Now, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take some red out of the shadows, and what we're doing that for is when you remove red from the shadows, it adds teal to the shadows and just cools off the image a bit more. Once again, we're going to try to get them minty desaturated greens. So we're going to desaturate that section of the greens, and we're going to desaturate, I think, another portion of the greens that was hit by a different light. Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and desaturate that as well. Okay. And yeah, I think we do this, and now we're gonna bring all those greens to a more mintier color. That's just a personal preference, guys. Like, to me, minty greens always look super good. All right. And yeah, I tried to select my skin tones just to see if I was going to do anything there while I'm not doing anything. And now we're going to once again crush the blacks and crush the whites. And it doesn't really make a drastic change to the image, but I try to make it a part of my editing workflow just because sometimes it does have a huge effect. All right, now we're going to see the before and the after. So basic correction, skin tones, and curves. We can see that we turn a really boring image into something that I really like. Like, this is a look that I super thoroughly enjoy. And depending on how this video blows up, or depending on how many people actually get something out of it, I might show to anyone who doesn't know how to export looks that you create on your clips or films that you like and want to be able to recreate, I might put it out there on how to create LUTs off of your footage to those who don't know. If anyone's interested in that, like, please leave a comment. All right, once again, we're just crushing the blacks, bringing the whites up, messing with the shadows, highlights, and everything like that. Same old as with the other clips. And I'm gonna bring the exposure down, and once again, I'm gonna white balance off of that white paintbrush, and it brings this really cool again. Gonna bring that exposure down just a touch more, and okay. Now we're gonna go back into HSL secondary. We're gonna go over to the skin tones, select, and we're gonna fiddle with the skin tones a bit and get them right on the line that we need them to be on, all right? I know at this part it looks really creepy, but to me, this is an absolutely necessary part to color grading. You gotta have your skin tones on point. It's a huge tell between someone who at least somewhat knows what they're doing or a complete and utter amateur who knows nothing about color correcting yet. All right. And once again, because the room is a bit of a cooler tone, we're gonna add blues to the highlights again. I also have a bit of residual light coming in from the windows in this room, so that's another reason why. Once again, we're adding red in, and we're gonna balance that out by bringing that towards the yellow. So the key to this is you don't always wanna bring it to the yellow. If you check the vector scope and the line is a little bit to the right of the bloodline, you want to bring it the opposite direction to bring it to that line. I just happen to always be having to bring it to yellow for these clips. As we can see, skin tones are once again back on point. This is something that I was so glad that I learned, because prior to it I could never get my skin tones accurate, and it's just such a lifesaver. So I hope it's going to be a lifesaver to everyone else that is going to watch this clip. All right, once again, we're just crushing things down. I'm taking 2 sets of the gray and I'm desaturating them just to make sure that we're getting a true gray for my back wall here. All right, and last thing we're going to do is we're going to go into those greens. All right, cool. Already selected. So now we're going to go into the greens on my shirt, which are coming off awfully yellow. And we're going to bring it a bit more towards the green. And there we go. All right, once again, we're going to crush the blacks and crush the whites. And yeah, you can see when I click here, it doesn't make a drastic effect, but it's enough. Like, it adds something to the clip that I always feel like it's missing. Maybe that's just me though. And one last time, I think we're gonna be doing the before and after. All right, guys. Yep. And there we go. All right, I'm not going to be putting any of the stuff that I put at the end of the other video at the end of this one, because hopefully that video is what led you to here. But this is just a bit longer, detailed version of my color grading process, just to try to be as helpful as I can. If anyone that watches this has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me through any means, and I'll be sure to get back to you as fast as I can. All right. But thanks for watching, guys. Now we're just adding the vignette and checking it out for the last few clips. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.